chess friends, I hope you are doing well. Today, I am very excited to share a very interesting and intriguing match between me and LeelaZero. This game was played during the recent Bullet Chess Championship, where LeelaZero played as the white pieces against me. This game is brilliant and authentic. By the way, I recently started a new YouTube channel called Spirituality and Philosophy, where I will share spiritual and philosophical videos. If you are interested, you can subscribe to that channel. I will put the link in the description. So, let's get started without wasting any time. LeelaZero started the game with d4, and I responded with d6. I could go with d5, which is a very solid move, followed by c4, initiating the queen's gambit. Alternatively, you can play knight f3 and after c6, black has the option to play e6 or knight f6. Following this, white might play moves like g3, bishop g2, and bishop g7. White can also play a4, which is a very logical and solid move, in this pawn chain on the queen side. The white bishop stays on the king's diagonal, similar to the black bishop on the king side. This position is very reliable and good for black, who can initiate with knight d7, followed by e5. Moves like knight f6, controlling the center, are also standard. However, this game did not follow that path. In this game, we have d6 because my opening move dictated it. After e4, knight f6, I played g6, initiating the puck defense with bishop g7, knight c6 followed by e4. Black has many options, including bishop g4 in various lines, where the knight can potentially pin the knight on f3. So, after h3 by LeelaZero, it becomes clear that she wants to protect the g4 square from any piece entry and build a queen and bishop battery along the diagonal to launch a strong kingside attack, with the knight unable to occupy the g4 square to eliminate the dark squared bishop. h3 is a strategic move. Additionally, white can push the g and h pawns to attack the kingside. By playing knight f3 followed by knight g5, white can create significant threats to the f7 pawn, especially with the bishop on c4. This is part of LeelaZero's strategy. After bishop g7, Leela played a very solid move, g4. I discussed this move extensively in my recent videos, where g4 is a strong strategy in the king's Indian defense or the puck and modern defense. Pushing the pawns aggressively requires white to ensure a safe position for the king. So, after knight c6, you can see that I am preparing to push my pawn to e5, creating pressure on the d4 pawn along with the bishop hiding on g7. After bishop e3, we have e5. LeelaZero played a logical and authentic move by pushing her pawn to the d5 square, locking down the position and forcing my knight to retreat to e7. Therefore, I need to play c6 to break open the center, but I cannot do it immediately because after the pawn captures, the d6 pawn will be backward and can be targeted by the knight and the queen. At this point, you can see that the f5 square is well protected, and the light squared bishop also becomes vulnerable. From black's perspective, he cannot push the pawn to f5. This is the strategy. Alternatively, white can move the knight to e2 followed by knight g3, then push the pawn all the way to h5 to open up the h-file for the rook, launching an attack on the knight and the queen. However, Leela approached it differently by playing queen d2, creating a queen and bishop battery to attack the kingside and eliminate the dark squared bishop. I immediately castled, and after she castled, she played f3, protecting her center structure. By playing knight e2, she will have the opportunity to play knight g3 followed by h4 h5, attacking the pawn and opening the h-file. The bishop and queen are also in place to create heavy pressure on the kingside. That is the strategy. I thought, if she can make a strategic move, then so can I. I decided to progress on the queen side by playing rook b8, intending to initiate an attack with b5 and b4, because she is busy attacking on the king side. Some of you might think that the a7 pawn becomes vulnerable, and the bishop can easily capture it. However, after capturing my pawn, I can play rook a8, forcing the bishop to retreat and attacking the a2 pawn. This is why I will play b5, with b4 coming to disrupt her knight's position. She cannot push the pawn to a3 because b4 will attack both the piece and the pawn. Some might think of capturing the b5 pawn, but after captures, I will get the a2 pawn for no cost. rook a8 will be a favorable position for me because her king is also there, and the b5 file will be open. This position will be very critical for LeelaZero. And let me share a divine quote in sudden with you. Clinging is born to someone who dwells on the spheres of the senses, desire is born from clinging, and anger is born from desire. So, going back to the position, we see that bishop takes a7 is not viable. LeelaZero's pawns are advanced on the g and h files like a 5 gram speed connection, but she does not immediately attack with g5 or h5 because the pawn structure is fully closed. Black's pieces are stuck behind the pawn structure, and the knights are too passive. The bishop is locked down on the kingside, making g5 or h5 followed by h6 a viable move for white to attack the bishop on h6. Therefore, I decided to play h5. Striking on the kingside immediately, declaring to LeelaZero that if she can make progress, then I can also counterattack, because I am not less than her. At this point, some of you might be thinking about capturing the pawn on h5. But that will not bring any advantages because the position is completely safeguarded by black. Additionally, your own h-pawn blocks the rook file, creating a barrier. In this position, some of you might be tempted to play g5, advancing the pawn to attack the knight. However, as the knight retreats to e8, it protects the d6 square, and the pawn on c6 will create immense pressure. This way, the d6 pawn will be protected, and black can break the center by playing c6. Furthermore, the potential of playing b5 and b4 can become a significant threat to white. Some of you might consider playing bishop b5 to attack the bishop, but after c6, the bishop moves back, b5 is played, the pawn is captured, the bishop is captured, and the bishop moves back to b3. This gains control of the diagonal but does not resolve the problem. Black can still invade and attack by playing a5, creating logical pressure on the bishop by playing a4. Playing a3 is not viable because b4 will attack both the pawn and the knight on c3 simultaneously. At this point, you would have to play bishop d5 to protect the bishop. However, as I push my pawn to b4, attacking the knight on c3, the knight retreats. After captures, the knight comes to c7, creating immense pressure against the pawn on d5. As your d5 pawn falls, black's two center pawns will create a favorable position, the diagonal will open up, and the two connected passed pawns on the a and b files will cause significant problems on the queenside, along with the half-open rook file. This is black's strategy if you dare to play g5. In this position, Leela played king b1 very logically and reasonably. This move vacates the c1 diagonal, where the dark squared bishop might create potential attacks, and it strengthens the pawn structure from a2 to c2. After the pawn capture, we have queen g2. Some of you might think that capturing the pawn on g4 was a good move, but bishop g4 would come as a tempo, the pawn on e4 would become a backward pawn, and the potential attacking chances along with b5 and b4 would ruin the knight's position, creating numerous problems for white. Therefore, h5 is not viable. In this position, we have queen g2. Capturing the pawn on f3 is not viable. Let me show you why. Many human chess players might think capturing the pawn is a good move, but it opens up space on the kingside for the knight and the queen. The bishop gains an open diagonal, which is very reliable and flexible for white. As I mentioned earlier, the center is completely blocked, rendering the bishop and knight immobilized. Consequently, black must initiate a queenside attack by playing b5 to open up the file and create counterplay. However, white can immediately push the h-pawn to h5, attacking the pawn. When the pawn reaches b4, Leela's pawn can reach h6, attacking the bishop. After capturing the knight, she can play b3, securing her position. The queen needs multiple moves to checkmate on b2, while white can continue with h7 check followed by bishop h6, attacking the rook on f8. After the king captures the pawn, queen h2 creates immense pressure and a vulnerable situation for the black king. This scenario is losing for black, especially with the potential of knight g5. Returning to the position, g takes f3 is not viable due to knight takes f3, which opens up the file and creates flexibility for white. Thus, I strike in the queenside by playing b5, repositioning the knight and aiming to open the b file. After h5 in the game, LeelaZero tries some counterplay, but I capture the pawn on h5, as the bishop moves to d3 to protect the e4 pawn. Knight g6 protects the kingside. This knight guards the structure and threatens counterplay on f4 and h4. Providing an open diagonal for the queen, Leela seizes the opportunity to play bishop g5, pinning the knight to the queen, making h5 a target for the rook, as the knight moves to f4, attacking the queen and defending h5. Queen h2 is played. After the pawn capture, the knight moves to g4 to attack the queen on h2. Although your queen is under attack, capturing mine isn't feasible, as I can easily recapture, leading to a favorable position for black. After the queen exchange, the bishop can reach g4. b4 can disrupt the knight, and the black king will be well protected. Therefore, staying longer with the queen on the board, Leela plays queen g1. So far so good, and I responded with queen e8. In this position, some might be tempted to play f6, while others might consider queen c8. However, both moves are ineffective. Queen c8 aims to involve the queen on b7 for queenside counterplay, but it requires many moves and an open file. Therefore, I can respond with bisbop takes f4, forcing you to capture. After white captures the pawn on h5, you might consider ne2 e3 to attack the rook on e1. However, white can play a genius and authentic move, rook g5, attacking the bishop on g7. This move disrupts your kingside position completely, opening up the g and h files and leading to a decisive advantage for white. Returning to the position, instead of queen c8, I chose queen e8 to safeguard my kingside and dominate the half-open e-file. Simultaneously, the knight is protected by the bishop, the dark squared bishop guards the center, and the knight on f3 creates kingside counterplay. By removing the pawn on e4, Leela's knight can access e4 to create kingside counterplay and free up the light squared bishop. Therefore, we have bishop takes a4, forcing you to capture my bishop with the pawn. After Leela captures the pawn on h5, you can see that she can brilliantly and authentically play the strategic move pawn to e5, gaining access to the open diagonal for the bishop and allowing the knight to come to g5 for kingside counterplay. In line with Leela's strategy. Oh Leela, you are playing beautifully as always. She played rook takes h5, initiating an invasion by playing rook to g5, attacking the knight and the bishop simultaneously. So, I responded with b4, kicking the knight on c3. However, she played a cunning move, knight to b5. What? She just played knight to b5, putting her hand in the snake's cave, as the knight is under attack by two pieces. But, ironically, none of the pieces can capture the knight, because if you do so, I can easily grab your knight on g4 with my queen. This would put your bishop under attack, and the g and h files would be completely open for me, creating a devastating attack on the kingside. So let me tell you a secret quote about life. The less you respond to negative people, the more positive your life will become. In this position, I played f5 because the knight is under attack by the bishop, and the rook is also threatened by the queen. Leela first played rook g5 to safeguard her rook and create pressure on the bishop and knight, but after I captured the pawn on e4, it created a dual threat to the knight and bishop. At this point, some of you might be tempted to move the rook to e1 to gain access to the e-file. However, the pawn is under attack, and you can't capture any of these pieces because rook takes e8 would result in the loss of your queen. Additionally, you cannot push the pawn to e3 because my knight can logically move to d4, and your bishop cannot capture the knight as it is pinned to the king by my rook. So, in this position, after the queen moves to f7 and the white queen goes to h1, you can see that the file is dominated by the white queen and queen to h7 is coming. Therefore, you have to free up some space for the king by playing rook to e8, creating some breathing room. However, after the bishop moves to f5, it directly pressures the bishop. You cannot capture the bishop immediately because after knight takes f5, there will be immense pressure on the bishop on g7, supported by the knight and rook, leading to a deadlocked position for you. After the king moves, bishop takes d7 will follow, and after you capture, rook g1 will create a hypothetical position where the knight is under attack, and the bishop on g7 is also under attack. Only the queen is saving these pieces. but knight to e6 will come to create a check and attack the bishop on g7, resulting in a completely deadlocked situation for you. Returning to the position, we saw that pawn to e3 is not viable, even if you consider bishop to f5. Another natural-looking move is to play queen to f7, which seems logical and like a move by a 2000 ELO rated player. However, as I mentioned in my previous video, a 2000 ELO rated player is just a dust in my shoes. White can initiate an attack by playing rook takes e4, putting your knight on g4 under attack by 2 pieces and threatening the bishop along with the g-file. So, after rook goes to e8 for rook exchanges, I can easily decline it and play knight to d4, bringing the knight to the center to play some counterplay. Here, black must play king to f8, and after that, rook e6 will come, a stunning move that could even surprise Magnus Carlsen. This move blocks the bishop's diagonal, putting the knight under attack and leaving your position vulnerable. Even if you capture my rook, I can recapture your bishop on e6, putting the king and bishop in a position where they can be attacked by 2 pieces. This move also allows my bishop to come to g6, creating vulnerabilities on the king side against the queen and king. The knight can then jump to g5, creating counterplay on the king side, as your king lacks protective pawns. So, black can find the best move here, knight to f6, but it will not resolve the problem. Because I can immediately respond with the cunning move, bishop to g6, putting pressure on the black king and the rook simultaneously. As the queen retreats to the g8 square, I can easily capture the rook. Subsequently, I can play rook to f5 check. When the knight blocks, here comes the queen on g6, a very trapping move, creating a burden and vulnerabilities around the king side. The rook is under attack, and this position is completely favorable for me. The game will be over. Going back to the position, at this juncture, we saw that both moves, queen to f7 and pawn to e3, are garbage. So, some of you might be tempted to play bishop to f5 to protect that pawn, but it is a complete blunder and rubbish move, as I can play knight back to d4, attacking the bishop on the f5 square with 2 pieces. If your bishop retreats along this diagonal to protect the pawn on e4, then I can easily grab your knight on the g4 square. If your bishop moves to another diagonal, then I can easily capture the pawn on e4, putting your queen in a precarious situation. Returning to the position, we saw that even bishop to f5 is not viable, which is why after pawn takes f3 happens on the board, I sacrifice my queen on the e8 square. I give my queen to LeelaZero. By sacrificing my queen, I get 2 rooks for the queen and 2 passed pawns in the f-file. Although they are doubled pawns, the knight can protect the pawn, and the bishop is trying to protect the king side. The light-squared bishop is trying to protect the knight. From LeelaZero's perspective, the rook has an open file, the diagonal is wide open for the bishop, and the knight is creating too much pressure on these pawns. Even the queen from g1 is creating much pressure on the black king, so, she goes with queen to h1, trying to checkmate me in a few moves. But you know what? I am shocked. I cannot lose. The sun can rise in the west, the moon can give fire instead of coolness, humans can fly in the sky, but Stockfish will never die. After knight f6, rook to e3 happens on the board. I try to protect the pawn on the f3 square from capture, so, after a4, b3 happens on the board. It becomes evident that it attacks the pawn and the bishop on the e3 square, so, after knight e6, forcing me to capture and recapture, f2 comes with the idea of playing rook to e1, where the king and queen will be under threat. So, in order to safeguard her king and queen, she played a cunning move, rook takes g7, sacrificing the rook right away to play queen to g2 check, putting the king in a precarious situation where it will be exposed. After rook to g3, the queen captured it, and after a couple of moves, we have queen to d4, attacking the 2 pieces. As the king reached g5, she captured the pawn on b3 and moved her queen to a2, creating 2 connected passed pawns. It is completely winning for her. A few moves later, we have rook to g1, she is trying to push her a and b pawns. My pawn reached f2, but it cannot promote to a new queen as that square is well protected by the light-squared bishop. She has 2 connected passed pawns. We have rook to e4 to deflect the queen from capturing the future promoted queen. After b7, you might capture the bishop on the c4 square, but it would be futile, after the pawn promoted to a queen. She can easily capture that queen and promote another pawn to get a new queen, so, in the game, we have 2 queens on the board. As the game progressed, it was completely winning for her. She tried to promote her another pawn, but with a sudden move, she grabbed my knight, leading to a checkmate on the d4 square. What a mind-blowing game. I hope you enjoyed it very much. If so, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Wishing you all the best. Bye bye, see you.